Sabina?
I don't know why the other speakers haven't joined us yet. But anyway, so we'll start now and hopefully they will join in the meantime. So,
Okay.
I'm Sabina Kamninga. I have
Sabina, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Okay. So, should I just start from all, like, could you hear me or you just
I can
will
hear
hear
you
me?
now.
Or maybe it was the internet issue. So as I was introducing myself, I work as an evidence synthesis specialist at Campbell, South Asia. I completed a PhD from the Center of Social Medicine Community Health, JNU. And my PhD was about the intersections of gender and the relations of power among agricultural workers in the village of Punjab, which is like a northwestern state in India. And so I'm very pleased to be here during this session. So naturally, like we will be discussing some of the generation, but I'm not dedicated to just the of the organizers. So before we start the presentations, let's just for the time allocation. So now we don't have any other presenters. So I wonder how long we can go about. In addition to Ãine and Maria, but initially we thought that there were 3 presentations supposed to be presented in this session, and we thought we'd give 15 minutes each and we'll keep about 15 minutes for discussion. So let's see how it goes. I hope the other presenters are able to join. Sort of constrained due to this, the platform, the Hopin platform maybe, but I can't really say. So I hope they join us. So before and another announcement regarding the chat and the Q&As for the audiences. So we'd be very glad to know about your affiliations, where you come from, what are your research interests, how you're interested in gender issues, and whether you've conducted any primary research or you're doing primary research or you are doing a systematic review of evidence synthesis. So feel free to all in the chat. If you have any questions to our presenters, please put them in the question and answers for the convenience so that your questions don't get lost in the chat. So before I invite and Maria for the presentations, let me introduce you to
I'm sorry, Sabina. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear you, and it looks like from the chat that others can't either. I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know if others can hear. Can others hear me okay now?
Yes.
You can. Maybe Maria and I can just introduce ourselves with that, because I think that's what you're doing. I'm sorry, Sabina. But everything that you said really in the last couple of minutes has just been breaking up. It must be the internet connection.
I'm so sorry about that. I will have been introducing you both. So I will probably be putting the introductions as a slide maybe meanwhile. So I would invite you both for the presentation, which I apologies for the poor internet connection.
No, that's okay. I'm just going to share my screen. I think that's what we're doing. Hope that's going to work.
Okay, that's it, Ãine.
Okay.
Well, no, it's disappeared now.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you this morning. My name is Maria Lohan, and together with Ãine Aventin, we are going to present here today evidence for involving men and boys in low and middle income countries in family planning. What works, for whom, and in what circumstances. This study is funded by the CEDAL programme, which is also funded by UK Aid. The Centre for Excellence and Development in Impact and Learning is what CEDAL stands for, and it's funded by UK Aid. Thank you. So, next slide, please, Ãine. We are presenting here today on behalf of our team, and our team is a joint team between Queen's University Belfast, where Ãine and I are located at the School of Nursing and Midwifery, and also the Stellenbosch University, where Mark Tomlinson is from, the Women's Health and Research Centre in Nigeria, where Professor Friday Okinawa is from, and also we have on our team, and the main researcher on the team has been Martin Robinson, and we also have Jennifer Hanratty and Emer Ruan McAteer. Thank you, Ãine. We're going to present today a brief overview of this study. We're going to present the rationale for the study, the review objectives, the methods, and the preliminary findings. So, in terms of the rationale for the study, well, our study is focused on family planning, and for a very good reason, if you like. Family planning is so much the foundation for health and well-being in global society. And unfortunately, today, around an estimated 214 million women in lower and middle income countries in particular have unmet needs in relation to family planning. They would like to delay or pregnancy or childbirth, but are not using contraception for a variety of reasons. But for many, this is also a matter of life and death. And over 300,000 women per annum die from the complications arising from pregnancy and childbirth. And indeed, these complications are also the leading cause of death for adolescent women in lower and middle income countries. But our focus is actually today on men. And the reason for that is that family planning is, of course, a gender relational activity. And men are so much implicated as being either enablers of women's use of family planning or inhibitors. And so while most interventions are targeted towards women, and rightly so, it's also important to incorporate interventions which are targeted to men and include men in order to enable women's family planning. And indeed, to treat men as agents of family planning in their own right. Our review today is a review which uses causal chain analysis. And I suppose that is the novel part of our review in the field. And the reason why we have chosen this type of analysis is so that we can focus not only on what interventions are effective in engaging men and boys in relation to family planning, but also what are the components of those interventions? What makes these interventions effective for whom and in what circumstances? Thank you. So the research objectives of our study is to, first of all, update the experimental evaluation evidence on what works for men and boys in terms of engaging them. We're looking at what are the impacts of these family planning interventions, so the evidence for impact. And then we're moving towards this question of what are the characteristics and components of characteristics of male engagement programs which are associated with effective family planning related outcomes. And in so doing, we're looking at keeping an eye to variation in terms of what works for whom, where, context and participants, and of course also examining unintended consequences. So now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Ãine Aventin, who's going to take the presentation from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I can't see anything other than my slides at the moment, but as Maria said, I'm going to continue on now and talk to you about the methods that we've used and also to present you with some preliminary findings from our review. So we included in the study then randomized control trials, quasi-experimental studies, as well as some related process evaluations and qualitative studies, and I'll tell you more about that later. We included both white and grey literature, and we included men and or boys as long as they were aged 10 and over. We limited the search to low and middle income countries. And we also had stakeholder involvement was central to the methodology of this review. So right at the outset, we set up an international advisory group composed of over 30 experts in family planning and implementation and various fields that were relevant to the review. And we involved these experts right at the start of the project in helping us to refine our review questions and to design our review logic model, which I'll show you in a moment. And then we met with them in the middle of the project, I guess, whenever everything was ongoing, and we talked about our preliminary findings to them and refined our questions and our analysis based on those discussions. And then when the review is finished, we will meet with them again to talk about how best to disseminate these and how best to make to maximize evidence use of our findings. And as Maria said, we use causal chain analysis for the study, and that is one of the novel parts of it. So while we look at, as Maria said, the extent of existing evidence, evaluation evidence in relation to studies that involve men and boys in family planning, we're also conducting a causal chain analysis, which is basically a meta regression, looking at the different components from the inputs to the outputs. So what happens in between the intervention and the expected outcomes. Meta regression, meta-analysis for that. So this is our review logic model. I'm not expecting you to be able to see it. I realize it's very small, but really what I just wanted to point out was the complexity of it in a field like this and how many different elements there are. So you can see that we sat down with our advisory group and we worked on all the possible things that we might find in the different studies, from inputs, outputs, impact, and then yellow, the different internal, external moderators and mediators and different process factors that we would look for when we got these studies together. And really this review logic model is very useful in helping us even to design our search terms, our data extraction forms. We used it as well to as a coding framework for the qualitative studies and the process evaluations that we included. So overall it was very useful, has been a very useful tool and continues to be as we proceed with the review. So on then to preliminary findings. So we retrieved a large number of records, over 8,000 after almost 9,000 after duplicates were removed. And following then title and abstract and full text screening, 127 records were included in the review. Now that, as any of you will agree, is a very large systematic review. And within that, so in consultation with our advisory group and looking at the evidence we had and the various statistics that were reported in outcomes, we decided that we would focus the causal chain analysis on 44 studies which had a substantive male engagement component. So to be clear, that all of those 127 studies all involved men or boys in some way. In the receipt of intervention, men and boys all received the intervention. But these 44 studies were different in that they either tailored their materials or procedures in some way to engage men and boys, and or they had this purposive targeting of men and boys in order to affect family planning outcomes. So these 44 studies really made it a central part of their intervention that they were to involve men and boys, and the authors argued that involving men and boys in this way would impact on outcomes positively. That was their hypothesis, I guess. So then of those 44 records, we looked closer, and 34 had enough information there to enable us to include them in the meta-regression. And so we used 34 then of those 44 in the causal chain analysis. And we also identified then 31 what we call sibling papers. And really these were process evaluations or qualitative studies that were related to the 34 evaluation studies. And they were also included in the causal chain analysis. Okay, so just to sort of give you a broad sort of sweep of what we found. So more than 50% of the studies took place in Africa and the Middle East, 30% in Asia, and 20% then in the Americas. And you can see there the most common study sites that were reported in our 127 studies. In terms of participants in all the 127 studies, there 45% were mixed age groups. So these were really generally participants of reproductive age that were included in the studies. 31% of them focused on adolescents only, and 24% on adults only. And then when we started looking then at the components of the intervention, and as you can imagine, these varied greatly, and the reporting on them varied greatly as well. But 96% of the studies included involved some kind of education or informational component in them. Social support was also central in terms of, a lot of the studies used, for example, local people, local professionals, local men to help deliver the intervention, different things like that constituted social support. There was also, you can see all the other elements there. As I said, male engagement, 32% of the 127 studies had this central male engagement aim or objective. And of interest here to this, given the theme of this presentation this morning, gender was a focus for 24% of the studies. And really what that generally looked like was some kind of gender dialogue or gender education focused around gender and gender equalities. Some of the studies were gender transformative in nature. Some of them had a more gender aware approach where they were just trying to encourage discussions of gender inequalities and things like that. Communication, should point out as well, was also central in terms of encouraging communication between couples or communication among couples and the wider community, perhaps in-laws, family members, or even encouraging communication between couples or individuals and healthcare professionals. So there was a variety of different outcomes reported, as you can imagine, and just focusing in on the male engagement studies here, then you can see that of those 77% reported contraceptive use. Generally, in most of the studies, that was contraceptive use of the women rather than the men, but there is some of the studies that report both, and some of them report contraceptive use for men only. And you can see the range of other, pregnancy timing, and desired family size were all reported as separate different measures. So it didn't make sense to group them. We've grouped them here in terms of just reporting, but in terms of the analysis, they were too different in order to group them. And you can see all the other outcomes there: attitudes and knowledge about contraception, communication about family planning, service use, and equitable decision making about family planning were all the most common outcomes reported. Okay, so my final slide then is just the analysis, the causal chain analysis is ongoing. We're very nearly there, but we're still involved in the final stages of that. And I suppose from our narrative synthesis of the 127 studies and then the 44 male engagement studies, these are the things that we will be exploring, or some of the things that we'll be exploring as part of the causal chain analysis. So what seems to be coming out from the studies that we've included is that couple communication seems to be central, and not just couple communication, broader communication, as I said, with and this is communication about contraceptive use generally. Contraceptive counselling is the term generally used. And this focus on joint decision making, making decision making about contraceptive use, something that happens between a couple, and encouraging that and giving skills in relation to that. So that is one of the causal chains that we will examine. If you train couples to communicate about family planning, does that then impact on joint decision making, and then does that then impact on contraceptive use? Health service enhancement is another element that we will be exploring. So generally, this is for expectant couples or postnatal couples that have just had a baby, and this enhancement of the health service, where family plan discussions become then a part of that, family plan discussions that involve men, I should say. Another thing we want to explore is this. Some of the studies involve contraceptive counselling for couples, whereas others was for men only, and even some just for women only, and examine sort of the differences there. And there seems to be mixed evidence in terms of some saying yes, it must be couples only, or others saying it's okay just to provide this to men, it's okay just to provide this to women. So we will examine that with the meta-regression also. And then interventions including gender transformative education and communication is obviously something that we will explore further to see. It does appear that those studies that include that gender transformative educational component appear to have positive outcomes. But we will examine that obviously with our statistics too. And then these multifaceted interventions that target not just individuals, but also broader, the couples and as I said, mother-in-laws, family members of the community. And just a final point to make, and that I alluded to earlier, is just in terms of the outcomes reported, that generally these outcomes were for women's use of contraception. And I think that sort of tells us a little bit about the focus of the interventions and how men are perhaps perceived in terms of their role in family planning. So supporters of female family planning more so than users of family planning themselves. But as I said, we will explore that further as part of our study. So that's everything from us. Thank you very much for listening this morning.
Thank you, Maria and Lohan, for that wonderful presentation and such useful insights. And I look forward to hearing more about the review, like particularly about the aspects that you just mentioned, that whether it's like mixed group sort of, interventions that they work well, or whether it's women only or men only work well. So that would be very useful to hear. So I will take the questions for this presentation at the end, and I'd request our attendees to put the questions to Maria and Ãine in the Q&A box. And meanwhile, welcome Mwenda Kamninga, who joined us for presenting the paper on the negative impact of farm input subsidies on women agency in Malawi matrilocal settlements. So Mwenda Kamninga holds a Master's of Arts degree in economics from the University of Malawi. He is Research and Policy Associate with the African Institute for Development Policy, an African-led non-profit research and policy institute established to help bridge the gaps between research, policy, and practice in development efforts in Africa. Tony's research interest is in applied microeconometric analysis, and in the work he's going to present today, he is part of the team of researchers from Stellenbosch University and University Claremont, Oregon, that worked on a Partnership for Economic Policy funded project to study the unintended consequences of the Malawi Farm Input Subsidy Program. So welcome, Tony, and the stage is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do I have? I'm not quite sure how to share my screen, because I think I can't find the option to share my screen.
So on the screen, you see this play button, and the next to it is a screen which would be cross-spread. So if you just click on that, you should be able to share the screen.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I've also asked for you to allow Martin Mwale to also allow him to have his microphone open, because he's my co-author, and we will be taking questions together if there'll be questions. All right.
So I'll request Yashika to please add Martin Mwale also to the speakers list. Thank you.
Yes, please. So thank you very much. As already explained, so my name is Mwenda Kamninga. I'll be presenting on the negative impact of farm input subsidy programs on women's agency in Malawi's matrilocal settlement. I'm part of the team. I come from AfDB, African Institute for Development Policy, but I'm part of the team from Stellenbosch University that is led by Mr. Martin Mwale and other presenters, Dr. Vin, other authors, Dr. Dieter von Fintel, and Francesca Macheta, as well as Ãine Smith. So, to begin with, we'd like to talk about what is the motivation for this study. So, as you can see, or as we know, more than 50% of African agricultural workers in Africa are women. But only 30% of these women make decisions about farming. So what is the binding constraint here? It means that the binding constraint is that men own capital, which includes land and input. Okay, it makes most women not to be able to make decisions about their farming output. Malawi's farm input program, subsidy program, which was introduced in 2005 by the government of Malawi and has been running from 2005 all the way to 2019. It was introduced with the aim to improve productivity. Okay, and over time, this Malawi farm input subsidy program has improved or increased income from selling subsidized maize. But the question is, who decides on how to use this particular maize? Okay. Now, in Malawi, contextually, in Malawi, there is very high gender inequality, and of course, which means that when Malawi did the analysis of the Millennium Development Goals, the goal number 3 of gender equity and empowerment was not met. FISP in particular, it does target the sector which is particularly dominated by women, positive, which means that there will be positive impact on gender. That is in a theoretical. Now, the question is, do women win or lose from these subsidies, or are the impacts of these subsidies heterogeneous by local kinship practice? Okay. Now, let me give you a brief background of what the input subsidy is all about. So, the Malawi Farm Input Subsidy Program was holistically introduced, as I said, in 2005, and it has been running from 2005 to 2019. I mean, the issues of subsidy have been there in this country for a long time, since the 1980s. But they were stopped or abolished on the basis of inefficiencies. And as a result, they were reintroduced in 2005, and Malawi was a pioneer of reintroduction of subsidies in the sub-Saharan African region. Now, the generic FISP comprises of at least 2 fertilizer vouchers, a maize seed voucher, a 1 flex voucher, a legume or maize seed voucher. Okay, and it has different target criteria. So it targeted poor households with land for cultivation, and in that regards, there is high concentration of vouchers in Matrilocal South, because Matrilocal South is one of the regions which has got higher poor households, but these households have got land for cultivation. So we studied heterogeneity of these impacts for locality. Now, these vouchers, the catch here is that these vouchers are given to household heads who are mostly men. Over years, I think from 2005 to 2019, we have been using the Farm Input Subsidy Program. that was targeting a particular number of people to about over a million, smallholder farmers. But recently, this has been changed to affordable input subsidy program since 2020, which is targeting all farmers. This is about 3.4 smallholder farmers. Okay. Now, let me also give you a brief background of the matrilocality and the patrilocality in Malawi. So Malawi generally is dominantly a matrilineal land, is generally a matrilineal land inheritor, uses a matrilineal land inheritance system, okay, where land rights are granted along maternal line to person born in that particular community. However, there is matrilocality. In this case, means couples relocate to wife's community. Women gain rights to land through their mothers, and male kin manage rights because they are usually the household heads. In the patrilocality, the couples locate to husband's community, and men gain rights to land through their mother's line. The patrilocal households or headship is dominant in Malawi. However, there is a matrilocal. In matrilocal, men have no land rights. In matrilocal regions, men have no land rights, but dominate household decisions. Okay, which means that when there is divorce, for instance, women and the king retain their land, and the husband's power are 10 years. The husband's power is 10 years. Subsidies may strengthen their bargaining power at the expense of these women. Now, just a brief outlook of how the FISP and versus matro and patrilocality has been distributed over time. As you can see, this is a map of Malawi on your left, and on the right there is the number of a proportion of FISP beneficiaries. So in the north, which is dominated by usually dominated by patrilocality, a lot of people, there's over 80% of recipients. They belong to a matrilocal kind of a matrilocal system that is in the northern region, and in the southern region, over 60% of the FISP beneficiaries, they are in matrilocal region. So this is just a generic proportion of FISP beneficiaries by locality system in the northern, central, and southern regions of Malawi. Okay. Let us also look at the FISP kingship and decision making. So in terms of FISP kingship and decision making, we can see that in matrilocal region, the land rights, women have got land rights. But as I was explaining earlier on, women have got land rights. Men in matrilocal do not have land rights. The kin actually do also have, so the kin, these are the kin of women, they do have land rights. In terms of input subsidies, women do not receive input subsidies. The input subsidy is given to a male household head. And so this, because input subsidy is also given in more of a nuclear family, so the kinship here does not is not applicable. Decisions on harvest of income. For women, this is de jure rights, which is not equal to de facto rights. For men, they make decisions on inputs. And for the king, they make decisions de facto on the rights of the outcomes. Okay? So land rights, women and the king, they have got land rights, while the FISP household has, and then the scenario is landholders are powerful. So women decide. Landholders, which are also powerful, the king decides. But input holders are powerful. Husbands are the ones who decide on these ones. Okay. Now, we also look at as a continuation in a patrilocal settlement. In a patrilocal settlement, this is the difference from the matrilocal settlement. In terms of land rights, it is the women who the men who are powerful and they hold lands. They hold land, and women do not hold land in patrilocal settlement. Input subsidies, they're also given to men, and the scenario here is both landholders and input holders it's men and husbands who make those kind of decisions. Okay. Now, let's look at data and methods. So in our section, we use the 2010 and 2013 waves of the integrated household panel survey data. So this is the data that is collected by the Malawi National Statistical Office in support or in conjunction with technical support from the World Bank. So this is part of the living service measurement survey data that has been collected over time. We have got up to now, we have got 2010, 2013, 2016, and 2019 panels. But by the time of this write-up, we do not have the 2019 panel yet. We did not include the 2016 panel because of the split households in later waves, which introduced a lot of endogenous moves across kinship. In this study, we study male-headed households where there is a woman partner, and then we run equations separately for male-headed household and for female partners. And then we use the linear probability model with household fixed effects and random effect with Mundak device, which takes into account a time invariant of unobservable and unobservables, and using available because the unavailable instruments were unconvincing, and then also because it was not possible to use spatial discontinuities in a kinship location. So we motivate the empirical strategy in the following way. Okay. Now, looking at results at glance. So market participation, for instance, we see that, so we use here, for market participation, we use sales of maize and output sold in kilograms, as well as value of maize that is sold in Malawi kwacha is the currency for Malawi. So we see that in patrilocal household, we see that in terms of, this is household differences in characteristics by marriage custom and FISP participation. So we see that the difference between matrilocal and patrilocal is negative and significant. That means that indeed, in terms of maize sales, men participate more in maize sales. As well as output of maize sold, in patrilocal, there is higher output of maize sold, as well as also the value of the maize sold is also higher in the patrilocal regions compared to matrilocal regions. In terms of decision making, we also look at matrilocal women making more decisions than patrilocal women, while matrilocal men make less decisions than patrilocal men. So we can see that here, in terms of decision making here, the difference is higher for women in this is for women in matrilocal compared to those women in patrilocal. So this is one of the most interesting finding from this. In terms of also decision making on maize sales, this is for non-FISP, we see that actually in terms of women in matrilocal region, most women move out of precarious, we call it ganyu in this country, which is more of casual labor. So most women, they move out of casual labor to go and make decisions on sales of the maize. So the most interesting result that we see here is that in matrilocal, the change in liquidity is zero, and the change in term use as well is zero. But decision made, men make more decisions in matrilocal region compared to women. So husbands' inputs to bargaining vis-a-vis wives and kin land rights. That in short means that there is a kind of what we termed it as an emancipation of men from wives' kin when there is an inducement of FISP in that particular region. So FISP versus the kinship tax. I think this is where the end of the presentation is. Thank you very much. We'll take some questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Did you say Mawale also wish to speak, or was he going to join us?
No. So Martin will join us when if there'll be any questions that are rising. Because he's a team lead.
Okay, I see. Oswald seems to have dropped off somehow, but anyway, let's just begin the discussion. I'd see there is a question from Karen Bird, and she says, this is for Ãine and Maria. So the question is that, did the male engagement studies also include qualitative studies? If so, how you will combine the qualitative and quantitative data? And she compliments you for the great project.
Thank you. Will I answer that, Maria?
Yes, thank you, if you wish.
So yes, the answer is we are using qualitative studies. So we use connected papers so of those 34 evaluation studies that we included in the study with the male engagement component, we then use the Connected Papers app to look for sibling papers of those 34 studies. And we found 31 either qualitative or process evaluation studies that were linked to 18 of the evaluation studies that were included. And so we'll use those studies, those sibling papers, in two ways. First of all, we'll use them to inform the causal chain that we will analyze as part of the causal chain analysis. So we look to those papers so as well as using the narrative synthesis in terms of what those studies are saying they think is happening in their studies in terms of the causal chain, and we include the analysis of those qualitative and process evaluations within that to inform the hypotheses or these context mechanism outcome chains that we were going to examine as part of the causal chain analysis. So that's one way. And then the second way that we'll use them is that when we have the results of the meta regression, we will then look to the qualitative papers to help us to explain those findings. So whatever the findings may be, we will hope that the qualitative information and the process evaluation data will help us to explain that, or use the author's data, I guess, to help us to explain those wider findings. Is there anything that you wanted to add there, Maria?
Well, just that too, we will use wider range of data so that it's not just a circle between the studies within the review that will explain the outcomes within the review. So we will also base it on a wider range of reviews that we have also been involved in, or others have been involved in terms of generating the hypotheses. The qualitative data will feed into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria and Ãine, for responding to the question. So as you mentioned, that this is probably the first systematic review that takes into account causal chain analysis as a framework to sort of, explain the how and why questions as well. So it would be, I think, useful if you spend a bit more time explaining the causal chain analysis. You might like to go back to that slide, explain a little bit, maybe it adds to the knowledge of some of the participants, as we still have some more time for, so I think it would be useful to do though.
I'm just sorry, I'm trying to remember what slide that I have there. But just to say, I get from the causal chain analysis, Maria and I probably aren't best placed to comment on the details of that, because we're fortunate enough to have an expert at Campbell, two experts in fact, Jennifer Hanratty and Ciara Keenan involved in the review, and they are in fact conducting the causal chain analysis elements. But as I said, I mean, it is fundamental. Sorry.
I'll hop in too, Ãine, if you like, actually, on it.
Yeah, I'll certainly like to do that, Maria. So fundamentally, the causal chain analysis is looking at, so maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe I'll share that, share the logic model slide again, if you just give me a little moment. Sorry. Is that working?
Meanwhile, like till the time Ãine figures out the slide. So we have a question for Tony, and the person is interested in knowing, is it worth organizing the world into matrilineal societies? So Tony, you might just think of your answers meanwhile, like Ãine is figuring out the slides.
Oh, to think of that. Okay, sorry, I'll share again. I thought you were going to answer it now. Can you see that slide okay?
No.
No, sorry.
Can I take that one, and maybe I also allow Martin to also to respond? Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Then.
So the question is that, is it worth organizing societies in matrilino organizing? So here's a fun fact. What I tend to do here is, first of all, the person who's asking the question should know that Malawi is predominantly a matrilocal society. It is a matrilineal society, predominantly. Actually, about 80% of Malawians, they participate, or they do a matrilineal kind of system. So even though Malawians are predominantly matrilineal, which means that descent is traced through the women, but Malawi has also the other part, it has patrilineal societies. Okay, which means Malawi has got two sides of the same coin. So we have got that's why it is a very interesting context to study, because we've got two sides. We've got both. We do both matrilineal and patrilineal kind of systems of marriages. Okay, so first of all, it's already organized in that way. But I want to understand now, what would be the women's, because we're talking about gender issues, what would be the women's issues, or women's ability to make decisions in a society where they have got control over land, in a society where so this is an agricultural community, and control over land is one of the key issues. Okay, so what would be the issues of if you put a government, let's say a government project that targets agricultural outputs in a society that is predominantly also led by matrilocal kind of society. So that's, in a nutshell, it's a very crucial thing to look at. Martin, do you want to add something on this issue?
Yes, I would like to add. Okay, I understand the point of departure for the question. Like, should we organize matrilocal societies? I think it's because in our study we are showing that in matrilocal societies, government social welfare policy is not benefiting women. So that's why I think the question came now, should we reorganize matrilocality? My straight answer is no. Let's not reorganize matrilocality. First of all, the traditions, I believe they are efficient in themselves. That's why they exist. However, traditions can evolve on their own. I think as researchers, we wouldn't advocate for changing them because they evolve. For instance, due to urbanization, there are some areas or localities in Malawi which are neolocal. That is, people move out of this traditional patrilocal into neolocal, where both men and women can own land, hence can own the process of the proceeds from the land. However, urbanization has been so slow in countries like Malawi, so we cannot even rely on it. But now, when we are implementing policies like the farm input subsidy program, the question is, we are seeing that it's producing negative impact, so increasing gender inequality in matrilocal societies. Maybe the question should be, should we target women directly instead of their husbands, so that they can actually own the process? I would also say, yes, target the women, conditional on reinforcing their land rights as well. So if you want to give the vouchers to the females, make sure they also have rights to the land on which they are cultivating. So I believe like land rights and the farm input subsidies can intersect to empower women. But as the situation is right now, they don't have land rights, but the subsidies are going to their husbands. Surely, such programs will continue to increase gender inequality in favor of men. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony and Martin, for responding to that question. And also, it was like it's also important to ask the right questions, as Martin also sort of just said. And what I got from the presentation was that you have to keep in mind the cultural and regional variations, like whenever you design a policy to sort of, so that the benefits reach the people in a sort of, manner that is useful to them, rather than disadvantaging them any further. So I have another question for you, Tony and Martin. I mean, it's just a conceptual question. I think Oswald was supposed to play that role, but since its connection is bad, so I'm going to take that role also. So you've used the secondary data, but I was interested in knowing whether, how have you how the data conceptualizes household headship, because that is a very complicated area in itself. So it would be good if you can just elaborate more about household headship. How was that taken in the data set?
All right, I'll answer that. The way the LSMS data is presented, the way it asks these questions, they just ask like who is the household head in this particular household or structure. Then the household head is given the first code as the first person, and the next person mostly is the spouse. So maybe it's possible maybe the household head is male, and the other person in the household is the female, or the other way around. But the sample we are working with was specifically only those households that responded to say the household head is the man. So we don't have female-headed households in this sample. So the results we present here are on male-headed households.
Thank you for that. Meanwhile, we also have a question from Howard White, who is interested in knowing if connected papers fetches the grey literature as well. For example, he says Oxfam evaluations.
So yes, theoretically it should do, Howard. I mean, the idea behind connected papers is it sort of creates like a map of any papers that are, as it says, connected to the paper that you're searching on. So if there's the point of it is, I suppose, that is, if there's any publication that is related to that paper, and that will it uses, I guess, well, I don't know what the calculation is behind it, but it uses references, I suppose, and citations from the original paper in papers that happened before and afterwards in relation to the paper you're searching. So it's a very useful tool. It's definitely worth having a look at if you haven't encountered it before. Did you want me, Sabina, to just respond about the causal chain analysis? I can.
If it is not a problem to you, I think it would be useful to the audiences.
Not at all. Not at all. I was just fiddling with my slide. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. So it was just helpful to use the logic model, I guess, to briefly explain, what the causal chain analysis might constitute. So as I talked about, from our narrative synthesis, some of the things that we came across, for example, was, that there was gender transformed, of relevance to this discussion, was that there was gender transformative elements in some of the studies and not in others. Also talked about, that communication was a central thing, for a lot of the studies, that they promoted communication among couples or among individuals and health professionals and that kind of thing, or among individuals and community members. So it is looking at the causal chain analysis. Will look at things like that from an input and activity viewpoint, look at combinations, and obviously look at subgroups, so for example, when I talked there about the communication among couples, usually that was, married couples as opposed to adolescents. And so that would be the inputs and activities, for example, of one causal chain. And then we would look in terms of, what happens in between that. So what components are there? What characteristics? Who delivered this intervention? Was it theory based? That level of detail, and look how that links then to the outcomes that are reported. And as I said, the focus in our causal chain analysis will, because of the data that's available in the studies we have, mostly will be contraceptive use. So looking at those outcomes, but as I said, these things that we have here as outcomes actually sometimes appear as mechanisms within. So when you have increased communication as an outcome, it might actually also be reported as a mechanism for contraceptive use. So it might, if you can imagine, in your causal chain, have something like gender dialogue, communication, which leads to increased communication, which leads to increased uptake of contraception. So that might be a causal chain that you would examine as part of the meta regression. And as I said, Jennifer and Kira will be able to tell you the specifics of the statistics that's involved in that meta regression. But I hope that sort of clarifies the general idea behind it, is to follow that, to use your statistics to follow that, to see if there are links in that chain whenever we pull all these papers together. Maria, did you want to add something in relation to that? We can't hear you, Maria, if you are talking.
Thank you. I thought that was an excellent explanation, actually, because it was grounded in our study. But just in a more abstract way, if you like, the principles of causal chain analysis are that the first step is to develop a logic model that Ãine showed you. And I know ours is very dense, but it's then about moving towards smaller logic models within that. And then the next piece of the causal chain analysis in general is about pairwise analysis to look at what interventions are effective. And then mediator and moderator analysis to identify pathways to effectiveness. And then the one that Ãine was talking about, which is the meta regression to assess the impact of specific components and characteristics, as well as kind of system level enablers. So those are the three steps that one takes for a causal chain analysis. And I suppose one of the best references for this is a CEDAW paper, the Centre for Excellence in Development and Learning. It's a paper by Neil et al. It's one of the working papers. It's spelled Kneale. And that is a very good reference for the principles of causal chain analysis.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Ãine, for the explanation. I think it would be useful for our audiences. And thanks again for the wonderful presentation. I mean, it rates the point that gender is not only women, it involves both sexes and both genders. And of course, there's a need to do more research involving both men and women and also other gendered identities. So thank you again, and thank you, Tony and Martin, also for your presentation, both excellent presentations in their own fields. And I congratulate and wish you success for your future endeavors. And with that, there is a link in the chat shared by Howard White about the publication Lohan just mentioned about, Maria, sorry, just mentioned lately. So there is a reference there, so do check out, and we hope to see you in the next event. Thanks again, all the speakers and the audiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabina, very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.
So we will